Check me out. Yeah. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Mile High Mentors podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Very excited to have you here. My name is Connor Doobie. I'm your host each and every episode. I'm here every week to bring you insights, information, resources from the top influencers, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, topic experts here in the state of Colorado. Hence the name, Mile High Mentors. And you're listening to our podcast today. So be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, leave us some feedback wherever you're tuning in at. And don't forget, we're pretty much on every single social media platform that you are. So go give us a follow there, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, because we do a lot of fun stuff, even giveaways. We gave away a $50 Amazon gift card a couple weeks ago, always posting behind the scenes content anywhere that you are at Mile High Mentors. Would love to hear from you. So again, guys, thanks so much for tuning into the podcast and very excited for today's podcast. But first, our partners and sponsors of the show over at Active Blogs. If you sell products or services business to business, highly recommend you go check out activeblogs.com. They have all the resources you're going to need for things B2B sales and marketing related. Again, activeblogs.com. You can go get a no-cost expert consultation. I'm sure they would love to hear from you as well. Today's guest, wow. Wow. I'm thinking of Julius, our producer, editing this right now and listening to me say that, and I know that he's grinning because, wow. I mean, this episode was really a highlight for me. I did not know what to think at first, to be quite frank, when Carl Hartman reached out to me on LinkedIn and said that he was interested in being on the podcast. But it's easy to be quick to judge. And once we heard Carl's story, some of the stuff that he's doing, what he's done over the years, like being an executive producer at PBS and some of the other top movie and visionary production companies in the world. He's been involved in crazy feats with telecom, one of the largest games that is known to the world. He was involved in that project, and today he is doing really fascinating stuff with projects, working with leaders and entrepreneurs, CEOs, high-level executives that are managing certain challenges in their life, and something that probably a lot of people struggle with, even me myself in a lot of ways. And so just flat out, this was a great podcast. I'm very excited for you to listen to it and just hear the incredible story. So without further ado, please welcome Carl Hartman to the Mile High Mentors podcast. By the way, thanks for coming down to the studio. Very interested to have you here. For everybody else that's listening in, give us first off a high-level view of what it is. Give us a 5280 view of who you are.
Well, I'll start out by kind of giving you some of the backstory.
Yeah.
About fourth grade, my parents took me out. I was living in L.A., and my parents took me out of the school that I was in during the early 70s when I was going to school. The school system in that area just was doing all sorts of strange things, new math and all these crazy things. And I was really struggling. So they did something that they thought was really intelligent, and they put me in a private school that was even harder. And, my mom and dad didn't raise a stupid guy, but I managed stupid on my own really well. And this is what had happened is I was struggling so much in school that the first recollection I have is that that year, right before school started, my parents went to Disneyland, and my dad always got like season tickets to Disney, and I was so fascinated with Disney all the time because they're all constantly, that my first day at school I wasn't even into it. And they gave us homework, which my previous school, we didn't get homework. And they used to give little slips out. They were this bright yellow slip. They called yellow slips, obviously, because they were yellow. And I tried to get my sister to forge my dad's signature because I didn't do my homework. And the yellow slip was when you didn't do your homework. And what she thinks is really funny now, but my dad found out. And that night he came into my room. And he's a big guy. He's built like a bodybuilder. And he ripped me out of my bed and literally ripped the pajamas off of me. He made me wear those the rest of the year to remind me, one, never to lie to him. But it was kind of the marker of what had happened during my school years, because after going to that private school consistently, I came home and I think I cried myself to sleep almost every night because I struggled learning so much. It was horrible for me. And it probably was 9th or 10th grade till I started really feeling better, feeling like I was into it because they changed the way they were teaching us.
Right.
I went forward. I was almost kind of a success nerd. In 4th grade, I started selling pencils to my classmates that would lose theirs. So I had my first business then, and I was actually made enough money where I would get bathroom passes to go down to the payphone and try to buy stock. So I tried to get a stockbroker, and my voice was still hadn't changed yet. So they would say, "Ma'am," and I was like, "No, I'm interested in buying stock." And so at age 19, I got my first job at a Fortune 100 company. My mom was one of the assistants to the CEO.
Yeah.
And so
wait, hold on. You just made a huge leap there. So how did you get involved with the Fortune 500 company or 100 company at 18?
Well, the CEO, the CEO, my mom was one of the assistants there.
And where were you at this time?
Just through school. He had met me when I was younger.
No, what state were you in?
California.
Okay, gotcha.
So I was in LA, and they had a bunch of problems in their communications department.
Yeah.
And so they did the really smart thing. They hired a 19-year-old kid to run it. But they just didn't let me alone. They brought in several of their top vice presidents, and they mentored me. I hadn't even finished college yet, and these guys were mentoring me in business. And they taught me a lot. And my parents were a lot older when they had me. They were in their 40s, and my parents were part of the World War II generation. So their friends were older, so I got to really appreciate older people, and I didn't blow them off. And so I accepted that mentoring. I thrived on it. And I turned what was a really struggling department into really successful. Had about, I think, 50 employees, if I remember correctly. And, I made a lot of mistakes. Honestly, I look back on it and I go, wow, I was young and I made a lot of stupid errors.
You're 19.
Right. But I learned a lot.
Managing 50 people. That's crazy.
And but I was being in communications. During that time, I got a degree in communications, and I also got a degree in cinema.
Yeah, this was back in LA. Yeah,
right, in LA.
And what kind of company was this?
I was a defense contractor.
Wow,
it's probably one of the biggest defense contractors that exists.
And they're still around.
Yeah, there. So to me, I had a lot of struggles, in school. Things got better when I ended up getting three degrees, all with 4.0. Well, why? Why is that? And one of the reasons is when I was about 10 years old, I did the absolute, I don't know if anybody has done this. I started reading books on learning theory because they weren't teaching me. Teachers tried to tutor me, but it wasn't working. So I'm going to figure it out on my own.
Right. And
that actually served me really well later on because I was constantly reading books on how to be successful in things, how to, everything from business to mindset
You're doing this early on.
Very early on.
What drove you to that early on? That's a young age to start getting involved with that.
It's really interesting because you can say, "Oh, my dad was this horrible man because he had some anger problems," but you have to look at the other side.
And that was an outlet for you. And
what's the other side of anger? But passion,
right?
So I learned to be not only a passionate individual but very tenacious. He was a very tenacious man. He went through the Depression. He went door to door begging for food for 14 brothers and sisters that were all younger than him. So that was something that I learned from him. And I think that's one thing that we need to understand is some people walk away from situations, whether it's with their parents or anything else in business, is they look at the bad side of it.
Right.
But they also don't look at the good things that they learned. And that's one of the things that I teach when I go out and speak is that I show some of the mental health issues that I dealt with that contributed to my schooling problems. Actually, there are other sides of it that are positive. But most therapists look at that condition as negative.
Right.
And I didn't actually discover the challenges that I was going through because I was still having challenges in work life, but I also had advantages.
Right. But you did well in college and earned 3 degrees.
Yeah.
So what were the challenges? What were you struggling with? Because you were doing well in school.
I had what some people considered a learning difficulty.
Yeah.
I bring this in a little bit later because I discovered it as I had my degree in cinema, and I had many other jobs. I worked at the studios, at Universal Studios for a while, worked my way up through in editorial. I produced some films, directed, some projects.
Yeah.
Somewhere fell into during that time I was working, but I also went off and started my own business and found I was sitting in an editing room in Universal, and I was looking at this editing machine, and I was going, but we're sending video over phone lines. Why can't we do that with regular video? And so I started investigating it, and long story short, I found 4 other companies. One was a defense contractor, one which is major telco, another one was a big computer company, and another one was a company that had developed a lot of the the compression software for like CD-ROMs and that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I almost like when Steve Jobs figured out that he didn't invent the smartphone, but he put a lot of things together that made the smartphone, whether it was music and the phone and that kind of thing. So I kind of saw the same thing, and what I did is eventually use that with those companies, invent the core technology that we have right now that we use for video on demand. So we figured out all of the technology to get around all of the switches in the phone lines, because that was really what kept streaming from happening, is there are switches in the phone lines and those kind of things. So the telco brought that. The defense contractor was... This
was your patented...
all I did was use other people's patents and technologies to create something new. So the defense contractor was downloading huge classified files from spy satellites.
Right.
So I figured out how to combine that with compression technology, and I had 2 other partners in that venture. And we started using it in the motion picture industry. In fact, the Library of Congress bought one of the first systems we had.
Yeah.
But I learned a painful lesson during this. See, one of my business partners embezzled money from the company.
Wow.
And so we lost everything, because once that went to court, the day that the court case ended, one of those companies all of a sudden announced that they had invented video on demand. That's a painful lesson, but did I give up?
Yeah.
No, I went on to produce one of the top-selling video games of all time, or one of the producers working on some of the set-top box versions.
Yeah.
And which CES just happened, and it reminded me of some of the crazy things that happened when we would go to CES, because we created all sorts of characters for it, and we did things that the current game producer wasn't really interested in.
Right. Now let's still go back. We're jumping from a lot of topics here, let's try and stay on track. When did you start to identify that your unique way of learning and how you operate was unique and there was something to it. Like, at what age, when was this after school that you had started uncovering this stuff?
I ended up as an executive at PBS.
Yeah.
And I was working for a division that was quasi-commercial.
And when was this?
It's probably been at least 10 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So, probably, somewhere between 2000 and 2007, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I left there. And I was working on some projects to, in a sense, I was almost like a closer. I would come in they would have projects that would have challenges, and I would come in and fix those projects. Mm-hmm. And I was finding during that time that we had a bunch of creative people there, and the creatives couldn't communicate with senior management very well. Senior management wanted Gantt charts and all sorts of other metrics, and these people weren't used to doing that. They were used to producing television. And at that time, the internet was kind of a new thing in a sense, and delivering the kind of content we were doing. So I had to create new kinds of ways to be able to have them organize it, process-based systems. That, it ended up being step 1, 2, 3, not going through a set of tabs and knowing what to fill out in a piece of software. And so I created interfaces for them for video production, audio production, all sorts of different things, so they could break down very complex digital projects.
Yeah.
And yet it would take that data and give it to senior management in a Gantt chart. And I had to learn how to translate for these other people. And again, it was a very unique situation because we had a lot of people that were not web producers. I had a video game background. And during that time, I was really struggling at home, struggling organizationally. I was great at organizing, but not always great at organizing. And so my wife sent me to a doctor at the time, and he, a psychiatrist, and he diagnosed me with having probably one of the most severe cases of attention deficit hyperactive disorder, ADHD, that they had ever seen. They would put me in a chair, and I literally couldn't sit still. They calculated the number of times that I would move during 30 minutes, upwards of 45, 60 times, that I would shift seriously, like I would have my leg over the arm of the chair and all sorts of things. And although those aren't necessarily indicators or symptoms, they started pointing out to me that this was a challenge, and I started working with a psychologist. My wife was going to school at the time, and she decided to become a psychologist, I think primarily to try to fix me. And so she actually eventually became a recognized expert in this field. Wow. Because, my kids had it, I had it, and it really affected our marriage.
Yeah, so this was pretty later on in your life that
right.
you had...
Now, I had been diagnosed earlier in life, but they were giving me some drugs, and I was kind of hallucinating, and so I just stopped all of that. And
now talk about that really quick. They went straight from diagnosis to giving you drugs. What age was this?
I think it was in my early 40s.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So it helped to a certain extent, helped balance me out because I was up and down. I had a lot of classic symptoms that people identify with ADHD. Yeah. And I would also get depressed. I had also, if I actually went through the system, the list of symptoms, because like anything else I did when I figured things out as a kid and I was learning, I actually started to study it. Yeah. And I was working on a project at the time, coincidentally, that was creating the first fully accredited internet-based high school for kids that were at risk, people with ADD, autism, and several other kinds of learning disabilities. And so while I didn't know as much as I do now about it, I brought that whole experience because I struggled learning, and now we're trying to teach these kids. And what really hit me one day when I figured out that we were making an impact is that, I was sitting with a young lady, sitting with a high school girl, and this is, of course, at the time, goth and all that was really popular. So she's sitting there, she's got the pierced ears and the whole thing, eyeliner, and she's sitting there sobbing. Here's this girl, and you could tell she had the tattoos. She was really hard, outside, and she's crying. And she said to me, I have failed every class in high school. This is the first class that I passed, but not only did I pass it, I got an A. Mm-hmm. And these were advanced placement courses. This wasn't, we didn't dumb the courses down.
You just restructured
it
to fit
to the way they learned.
Right. Is this LMS still around today?
It's around in several different forms.
Yeah.
The university where we did this work, because it was done at a university under a Department of Education grant, that we were. It was eventually sold, parsed out. The content is still out there in various forms.
Yeah.
And I think that they had some business challenges when they tried to commercialize it at the time. But the fact is that we did it, we tested it, and we were using a lot of story-based formats, a lot of contextual formats where they were learning in context, which, again, served me well when I actually applied this to business, because they were learning within a context that they understood and they appreciated. So, for example, we created one course in American government that was all very much like, looked like MTV's Road Rules. Everything was, we got actors, but we actually went to places, played it out, and had them experience American government.
Right.
In ways that teachers were then looking at this and they're testing it with students saying, I've never seen anybody take this approach before. You actually immerse them in the content and put it in a context that they understood for their age group and that kind of thing. And we did a lot of those kind of things. And then went back and tested it. And that was the advantage. It just wasn't a company going, hey, we're going to do this. It was the government saying, hey, let's go out and fund a university. Actually, that university had a distance education high school. At that time, the country's only one, where diplomats were. It was a correspondence school where they were, Britney Spears graduated from this high school.
Yeah.
Because they could do it and correspond with a teacher.
Yeah.
So they had the educational content, those kind of things there. But I learned so much that I applied to being able to help business owners later on.
So this originally started with the schooling, and you recognizing that the school system was not set up, still today probably not set up, to accommodate children with ADHD, ADD, and
I also have very high functioning autism, Asperger's, but really near the top of the
which apparently
spectrum.
So does Elon Musk and other.
Yes, quite a few. The list that's out there. If you look at some of the current people, entertainment industry, you'll find Elon Musk. But Adam Levine, there's a lot of different people in sports. You can keep going back even further where scientists have actually analyzed people going hundreds of years back.
Right.
So we know that Edison displayed the majority of the symptoms.
Of an autism or...
Well, no, actually, if you know, you can actually do a brain test after someone's dead. You can do a brain test. So we know that Einstein had autism. And that contributed to his ability to see things that other people can't. So I see patterns. I walk into a business and I will say, look at their manufacturing, and I can see the patterns in their manufacturing operation and know why their marketing is problematic. Because I see the patterns cross over. And it's something that I see. I can't always verbalize it, but I see it. And so teaching it to somebody else may not always be the easiest thing, but there's the relationship. So there are any number of people that we know now. Robin Williams was a great example. You see how fast his mind works, but one of the things I eventually learned was people with ADD and autism, there's the normal connect that a neurotypical person has between the conscious and subconscious, where there's almost a blockage there. You have to learn how to tap into it. That blockage doesn't exist with this population with ADD. So when you hear...
So it's open neural pathways that other people don't have?
And so...
Is this more where the right and the left are communicating, the right side of your brain and left side of the brain are communicating more?
But the brain also... there's a scientist, Dr. Daniel Amen, that's done a lot of brain research on this, and the brain actually fires differently than a neurotypical person. It fires in a different order. And so one of the reasons I discovered it, probably before he did, is that I had an ad agency at one time, and I was doing research in neuromarketing where they would do brain scans. And about of people, they would scan the brain during looking at marketing materials to see what the brain was doing. Well, there was about
This is what your company was doing?
No, I was actually taking some courses in this at a university, the University of Copenhagen. And what they were doing, there was a doctor in Australia that was doing brain scans of people looking at marketing materials, and 10% of them were totally different, and they couldn't figure out why 10% of their sampling was absolutely off. And eventually they did research to find out why all those people in that 10% range had ADD.
Yeah.
And so their brains were actually processing the information differently.
Right.
Not bad, differently.
Right.
They would come to sometimes better outcomes because they process things in a different order. And so as I was seeing all of these things and gathering my own data, I was realizing that things weren't as I seem. So typically when we see what, say, like the American Psychiatric Association says about ADD and that kind of thing, and my disclaimer is that I'm not a doctor. I do have two people that work with us closely. They're some of the top doctors in the world in the subject area, and have confirmed what I say about this, is that I began noticing that what we're told about ADD and what was really happening was different. So I'd been out with my grandson, and believe it or not, I have about a 9-year-old grandson, and I was teaching him T-ball a couple of years ago, so he was about 7 years old. And he has a serious case of ADD, or ADHD, and he wouldn't listen to me. He'd stand there in the tee, and he'd take a whack at that ball, and he'd go, and I'd try to show him how to, hold the bat and everything, and before you know it, he was running off, what we would call distracted in a school situation. He'd run off and he would be distracted. Yeah. And he's taking his bat and he's hitting the ball on the ground like it's a golf club and throwing it in the air, and Grandpa, throw me the ball, throw it up high, and he's trying to hit it, and come on back, let me show you how to do this. And before you know it, he'd get distracted again. Well, about 3 times this happens, he comes back, he picks up the ball and he puts it on the tee. And he stands there in front of the tee, and he holds the bat, and he goes, Grandpa, it goes like this. I take my bat, I hold it here, my arm has to be here, my feet are in this position. He's going through giving me the instructions that he wouldn't listen to before. And he stood there, and he said, and if I just swing level, and he starts hitting the ball over and over and over, and I couldn't get him to be distracted. And it was one of those realizations that I had, is that what looked like distraction was his mind learning. Yeah. So when he threw the ball up in the air, his mind's going, oh, what's the bat feel like this? Yeah. What's the bat feel down here? Yeah. So when I finally do it, now I have full command because my brain has processed this. Well, distraction is almost a very natural learning process. What a teacher may call distraction is natural curiosity. So when little Johnny walks across the room impulsively, as he has ADHD, and starts reading a book, and she goes, sit down, don't do that. Well, his mind said, I want to know more. I'm going to go across and get more information. Now, the teacher's like, you're distracting the class. Right. So there was a couple of, one when I worked with the University of Nebraska, they had done some research on this, and so has the University of Arizona, that they were putting kids in contextual situations, young children, and they would say, okay, for example, what are you interested in? Well, I want to build a boat. Fine. You and these other kids are interested in that kind of thing too. You guys go over and you figure it out. Now, in a teaching situation, teachers are like, well, I'm not teaching them. Right. I'm not physically lecturing them or have a book open. And so those kids would have to go figure out, well, how's a boat work? Read up on it, search the internet, search other books, read books on boating, learn math, learn the physics behind boating and how boats react in the water. And as they were doing this with children, they found out that they didn't have to drug them with ADD drugs, and they didn't have the behavior problems. So now the kids were learning within a context that they were interested in. So context is really huge for both a child and an adult with ADD, because when I work with a business owner doing this,
right,
we do a lot of analysis with them to understand what really drives them and motivates them, and connect a lot of the things we teach to them within a business coaching context to what really motivates them or what really interests them. Mm-hmm. So even if they don't like something, I don't like doing the accounting. If I can connect that to a context, well, if you don't do the accounting, you can't have the other stuff you want.
Yeah.
You can't do the fun stuff in your business that you really enjoy. Well, now they start connecting the two. Oh, if I get my numbers right and I monitor my numbers, it really doesn't take me very long, and now I can do the things I want because my business is functioning well.
What is it about high functioning ADD and autism and what was the other one that was in? Is it Asperger's?
Asperger's, which is high functioning autism.
Oh, okay. So they're kind of very similar.
It is. It's Asperger's syndrome is high functioning autism.
Are these proven to be a hereditary? And I don't want to say dysfunction. Like that's why I was so fascinated to bring you on.
It's a hereditary. I don't call it. Although if you read the DSM-5, which will say that basically it's a brain problem, brain dysfunction. I forget what word they use. The D stands for. Something statistical manual. I forget what the D stands for. I'll look it up here for you. But it's all psychiatrists and psychologists use it to define. It will define all basic neurological conditions or not psychological conditions. Mm-hmm. And what I just saw differently. And so one of the advantages is that I helped my wife study for her master's degree in her undergraduate work, being a psychologist. So I saw some things probably that other people didn't, having that eclectic information, or experience.
So it's just a way that your brain is wired that is typically hereditarily passed down.
Well, and some of the things I'll say are somewhat controversial, but I have the science to back it up.
Yeah,
is that what we know is that it is hereditary, but the triggers are interpersonal. So between the age of about 2 and 6, when the amygdala develops, and that's the fear centers of the brain, we start learning things from our surroundings. So between 2 and 6, what do you know between 2 and 6? If you talk to a 6-year-old and ask a 6-year-old to explain quantum physics to you, and they're like, well, there's a big blue ball, and it's the world, and they don't know.
Right.
They don't know.
Yeah.
And so they make really bad, poor subjective interpretations about the world. So when Dad comes home and he slams down his lunchbox here on the table because he's tired, and it's just what he does, small child's in the room, and they go, Dad's mad at me.
Yeah.
Well, Dad isn't mad at you. Dad put down his lunchbox because... And so the child starts making poor interpretations of the world. But since our brain is so plastic, it doesn't take very long before you start actually learning, oh, gee, Dad does that enough. They start getting anxiety. Is Dad going to do that again? Should I be afraid? Is it me? And they start making bad interpretations of the world. And we actually carry those through with us the rest of our lives. And you can read, like Carl Jung says very much the same thing. Dr. David Siegel has written a book called The Developing Mind, which takes about 15 years of the latest brain research, and shows this, that our interpersonal relationships impact our emotional state. And that emotional state impacts our behaviors.
So you're saying it's as much of, there's some precursors, but it's as much of external environment as well, which could lead you down that neurological connection.
Because none of us, I don't care if you're neurotypical or not, none of us own our own brain.
Right.
That's people don't necessarily understand that we don't own our own brain. Everything around us, the people that talk to us, you talking to me, other people impact me, which means that I'm taking all the sensory input, making an emotional judgment about that, and then I'll react to that. And that pattern happens all the time. But people with ADD have a higher than average emotional state. And so you'll start seeing behaviors that maybe you're not going to see. So everybody gets distracted.
So is this what you're saying that's controversial, is the fact that the emotional state has an impact and factor on...
Oh, sure. I mean, I can read you the descriptions out of, say, what the American Psychiatric Association says. I think that's a title, or it's the American Psychiatric Association.
Right.
That they will say, well, we don't know what causes it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, and many other things. But I have seen proof otherwise, as we've seen it in how I've been involved in research studies. I just made a slightly different interpretation of what they're doing. I'm not going to say that there aren't situations that there are individuals with ADHD and some of these other conditions where some of these things may not apply. There is actually things like abusive states where a child may have been abused and that kind of thing, where these things don't always apply. So there are some outliers. But what I saw is when I saw a child naturally exploring, but now I see a business owner sitting in front of their computer, distracted. Mm-hmm. They're staring off into space. And I actually sit down with them and help them understand cognitively why they're doing that, as they may be actually searching for information or data that isn't in front of them right now. What do I really want? Why am I having these feelings that are leading to the distraction? When they understand the feelings leading to the distraction.
So they're not actually distracted. They're putting together context of what inputs they're getting at that moment.
So things like hyper-focus.
Right.
They'll be impulsive. I used to do impulsive things. I've done really crazy impulsive things,
mm-hmm.
and even in the context of being an executive. Mm-hmm. And I have some of the funniest stories of things that I did because of my attitude and feeling about what's going on around me.
Right.
That I reacted. So those things, I started making connections between the two. That knowing that now behaviors are generally triggered by emotions, but not all behaviors are triggered by the same emotions, or not all emotions trigger the same behaviors.
Right.
So say, for a simple explanation, anxiety in one person may trigger distraction. Anxiety in another person may trigger hyperfocus. Mm-hmm. So you can't always back into it and say, oh, they're hyper focused. Well, this is the emotion tied to that. So
everyone's so different.
Right. Everybody's so different. So one of the things, and this is, I have a client who's a really young Asian guy that he's funny. He's really quiet, and he's got ADD. He's got his wonderful little company that he runs, and we would sit there, and he would start pacing the room. Mm-hmm. And what some people may see as nervous energy and say, well, hey, let's go for a walk. Let's get rid of the nervous energy, right? Yeah. That I said to him, I said, so what are you feeling right now? He said, well, I've got a bunch of letters from attorneys sitting in my inbox. I'm dealing with this situation, and this is what I'm feeling. I said, great, let's deal with those feelings. And I said, what now? He goes, I want to write the letter. In fact, I want you to leave for a while so I can get the letter written that I need to write, and we'll come back. And I actually did some other work for like 15 minutes. He wrote the letter, and he was fine. But he hadn't dealt with the emotional issues that were keeping him distracted from actually getting it done. Right. And so once we did that, I'm sorry, I should have shut my phone off, that once we dealt with those things, now I could see why he had these blocks while he was working. And so we helped work through that so he could see consistently why he was having those responses within the business. Now, he has a business like everyone else, but the things that are blocking him from moving forward are slightly different. And so now you have to kind of combine those together within a business coaching or business consulting. The other thing that we found with working with somebody like that is that it becomes a bit like addiction therapy. In addiction therapy, you're constantly there with the person helping them move them forward. So we have our staff that sit down and work with that individual so we know what they have to accomplish. And we will contact them various ways, whatever works for them consistently, so they're pushing through those things. Yeah. Do you work with a client at a time and have your staff hyper-focus on the client, or do you work with whatever works for them, but we'll actually walk in and mentor them. So I show them how to do it. Yeah. So I have one of my staff he's got his MBA, he's got a lot of process experience, which is great for these people because we help them with their processes. But they're also, he's a former CPA. So he can help them understand and work with them side by side in their business. And to me, I always see a coach as somebody who sits on the sidelines and calls in plays.
Right.
So as a mentor, they actually go in, show them how to do it and how to master it.
Yeah.
So they're not getting distracted by the feeling, well, gee, I don't know what software to get for this. Well, let me walk you through it. Let me take you to your CPA and show you what questions to ask so you know how to do it. Because they'll get emotional about it. They'll have anxiety about going out and asking the questions. Or going and interviewing CPAs, so they just won't do it.
Right.
And instead they'll be on Facebook because they're still dealing with that emotion and they'll get distracted.
Yeah.
So I'll see the same thing in body language. I have a doctor that we work with, and he does a lot of kind of energy healing on the side. And he started showing me how people's emotional states impact their body. So the way you're sitting, the things that you'll do with your hands, the way you hold your hands, that even subconscious pains that are going on, that you'll have reactions. And so I started seeing those in the body, the emotions that were driving that. So the tapping the fingers, the fidgeting, got a fidget device.
I always shake my leg constantly when I'm sitting. Constantly.
Right.
I can't sit still.
Right.
This is when I podcast is probably one of the times I'm not doing it. But almost all day, every day, I'm constantly shaking my leg.
So I have a client that has, he's been to my wife, he's been diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah.
I saw him juggling his shoes while we were having our sessions. And he literally would wore loafers, and he would take one off, both off, take one, and it was amazing. He could take his shoes and flip them. He used to be a competitive skateboarder.
Literally juggling?
Like with his feet. He would sit there, and the shoes moving around his feet, and he's like, and I'm going, that's amazing. And so one day I said, so what are you feeling? And he brought out this whole, string of things that were bothering him that time, and I was like, all of a sudden it stopped. So you could see him, I didn't even say anything, he put the shoes back on, and he was behaving. So this
now, would that person be, hey, you have ADD, and in a traditional case, we're going to give you medication for that?
With some people, it balances them out. I have a doctor that I work with that claims that he's worked with me in order to actually reverse some of those things with people so that they can learn to understand it. I do some of the same things. So I teach them different forms of, we teach a form of meditation where they can actually get to the point where they feel what their brain is doing. So there was a time in my life when I would get upset, and my dad was angry. I learned this from him. I would throw things all the time. I would get pissed. I would just throw things across the room. I now cognitively understand what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling it, what I'm going through, and I can pull that back.
You practice meditation yourself?
I'll practice several forms of it. We do a highly distracted form of meditation. So some people may do a breathing exercise and that kind of thing. We actually have people do meditation while they're either visualizing or physically, like riding a bicycle.
Yeah.
The reason I saw this therapy being used with people with Parkinson's disease, and their Parkinson's would stop. And so I started using this similar technique with people with ADD, and all of a sudden you would see them being able to start focusing more. Now they have something to focus on. I would put them through an obstacle course, but do the same breathing exercises. And so now they have to learn how to breathe and focus on that. And if they sat in a room that was silent, it would drive them nuts because their mind would be all over the place. So now I give them something to focus on. And it's a game changer for it. When I started doing that and came up with doing that, I got to the point where I could actually feel my brain switching. It's really weird because all of a sudden I could feel this energy in my brain, and you could feel one side of the brain doing something, and I was like, "That's weird."
Wow.
And one of the doctors we're working with us, he goes, "No, it's not. It's not weird. You're actually able to make those connections." Yeah. So when I see a business owner doing some certain things, we're able to not only work with them on the business side doing it, but teach them. We use some things that are similar to cognitive behavior therapy, where they start realizing why they're doing what they're doing and why they're making those decisions. Yeah. And now they're able to, it usually takes about 9 months for them because once you've passed childhood and your brain isn't plastic anymore, it takes really about 9 months to make those switches.
Yeah. Especially as an older adult.
Right. There's a great video that's out on the internet called the backwards brain bicycle. And if you've ever seen it, and it shows how they put gears in the steering system of a bicycle so it would steer in reverse.
Yeah.
And you would think, well, gee, I could ride this bicycle, and you can't, because your brain riding a bicycle is a very complex thing from a neurological standpoint. So when you make that one change, it's very difficult. So it took this engineer that did this about 9 months to learn how to ride a bicycle. Then he had trouble riding an old bicycle because his brain had actually relearned it. So he kept falling. See, falling, I mean, people say, falling is a learning experience, and people blow it off.
Yeah.
But falling is a learning experience. How do you think professional or Olympic skiers learn how to ski? Well, by very definition, them being an Olympic skier on the hill that day probably have fallen more than anyone else.
Yeah.
The brain goes, that's what it feels like. Next time I'll do a little bit different. And I learn from that.
Now here's my concern with all of this is, do you think there's danger in looking at the business owner or the child or whoever that's experiencing this methodology of how their brain works and just slapping the ADD or Asperger's or autism label onto them, where it may just be a slight, this person just genuinely learns different than this person?
Well, it's unfortunate we have a society that puts labels on it, but I think that I have this somewhere in one of the talks that I use where I talk that Joseph Campbell talks about that people that are any society will always punish the outliers, even if they have exceptionalism. So you can look at the bulk of the people you can go through lists of people that were the inventors, everybody from General George S. Patton to Edison to all these different people that we all have gone back and looked at that have something like autism or ADD. They thought the way they did for a reason. And so they were very unique. But because they were outliers in some ways, and they had some behavioral issues, and there are some behavioral issues involved, that as outliers, even though the world embraced them, I often say that people love a superhero, but they would never have them to dinner.
Right.
Because some of the other things about them, talking a lot, doing other things, obsessing about certain things, are objectionable in some social situations unless you learn to overcome that. And so, we put this label,
really
but I don't.
Do you think it's getting better now in modern age? Do you think it's a little more some of the way that this is? I had this weird connection, but some of the way that the brain functions in a high functioning autistic person, it's almost what the Silicon Valleyers are seeking when they're microdosing on hallucinogenic drugs and stuff like that. It's almost like trying to obtain that sort of way to cognitively process things,
or drugs, and also kind of people feeling like that puts them in
which people that are under the category that you work with, they kind of already process things that way, and people who don't are trying to seek that. And
so if all those people that see the value in it are trying to seek it, why are we labeled as being broken?
Exactly.
We're not broken. In fact, one of my mentors jokes that the average people, the neurotypical people, have CDD, which is creative deficit disorder.
Yeah.
And we laughed at. Well, I don't like to say that because I know a concert pianist. She's amazing at what she does.
Yeah.
Goes in, can play the music, but she's told me I can't write a song. So there are people that are able to do some very creative things, but they may not have that kind of creative gene.
Right.
I'm not, I have a friend that's was played in the NBA. He's a head and a half taller than me.
Right.
I don't complain about that. That's something that he was born with. I happen to have been born with certain things that are an advantage for me. But in our school systems and in other areas, we don't necessarily fit. I'm okay with that, but I have been using the term superpowers for so long. That's why we created one brand called the Superhero Boot Camp, because it was really to take those people and say, you're not broken. You do have some issues. I mean, we have a higher than normal divorce rate, higher than normal many other things. But
do you think a lot of it comes from the lack of education on what this actually is and how to work around it or work with it and be empowered by it more than anything?
Well, if I look from just what we know in psychology, if just a normal person goes through that very young age and acquires certain kinds of patterns, then they carry those patterns with them. Yeah. And there's just, and I'm oversimplifying, but if they're just a little bit more intense with those patterns, they'll sometimes get married to a person that can't take that. Yeah. That's why I say that it's that's why we have a 75% divorce rate.
Which is really interesting. So I have to start wrapping this thing up. Any last thoughts or insight that you'd like to share with the audience that's listening to this today?
Well, there's a lot of people that in certain areas, regardless of what's going on, function well. They've adapted, even if they've got some issues in their life. People will do that. People adapt. And we found that to a certain extent with people with ADD. Maybe it's maladaptive behavior, but they've still adapted. And so I guess the message that I would give is that I know that years ago I was in some horrible situations. I've lost everything 3 times. I've also been really successful. And what I learned was that I had to master these things. I had to learn how to translate what I did. I had to learn to master my emotions. I had to learn how to, even for myself, do things within context and many other things. Yeah. And then also I rely on neurotypical people around me to do certain things for me. So when I had an assistant, she would file certain things, but in a filing system that worked for me, because I created a whole new filing system just for how I thought. Yeah. I have done that same thing in many other areas. We've been creating calendars for people that think more in circular time, that work for them, so they can mesh with the rest of society and things like that. Yeah. And so it's finding somebody that understands you, understands how you think, because I don't, on the surface, when we go and work with somebody, I don't treat them any differently than a traditional business consulting client. Yeah. I work with them in some of these other areas. I still hold them accountable. It's still, you've got to do the work. Mm-hmm. Don't come to me and complain that I have to go make 20 sales calls today. Right. You do have to do it. I'll help you push through that. That's what's expected in in certain contexts. But it's being able to master those things and work with somebody. I've had people that have met me now going, you were so scattered years ago, you're so much more focused. Yeah. It's being able to learn how to master those things effectively for you, and everybody's a little bit different. And also master those things because every part of your life fits. So your health and fitness, your relationships, business, meditation, spirituality, those kind of things, they all fit together so closely, and sometimes people with ADD will tend to skew one way or the other. So you do have a successful life, so you're able to do things that and mesh with other parts of society. But then there are times when you come home and you actually live out your superpowers, right, and you put your cape on and you do things that the rest of the world may not like.
Carl, thank you so much, man.
You're
really
welcome.
Appreciate it. How can people get into contact with you or find you?
Right, we've got 2 different websites. One's easy, one's Business 303. So here in Denver, business303.com. Okay. It was like the area code, and we've got another site. It's called The Superhero Boot Camp. The Superhero Boot Camp. That's more geared. There's a lot of ADD information there.
Okay, so that's where people can go educate themselves.
Right, they can go educate themselves. Yeah. There's a lot of blogs there that are just free instructional content. We've got a book that I wrote with a psychologist that gives some ways to be able to
What's the name of the book?
It's kind of a long title. I don't recall off the top of my head. I've got another best-selling book on marketing, but this one, I wrote it not long ago. Now I don't remember. Yeah. I think it's called Mastering Your Superpowers or something like that. I don't remember, but it is there on the website that people can get. We don't attack people with the digital marketing and get on top of them. It's being able to help people. We've got several big clients. publicly traded companies. One just went public this week.
Wow.
that we work with. They're bugging me about trying to help them get their stock sold now that they're public. But it's a really fun thing to do, and helping these people to be able to do achieve mastery, because a lot of times traditional business coaching and consulting, if you don't understand these things, is difficult for people to work with. So that's why we did this.
So let's continue this.
Sure.
But I gotta close this thing, guys. Wow, thank you so much for tuning in. That was awesome. Please share, please like, and help promote Carl's episode here, and we will chat with you next time.